probably noticed that it's been quite a while since I published a video, and there's a very good reason for that. For almost a year I have been working on a huge project, and that project had a deadline, which also means that I have been spending quite a lot of time at the Lancashire Archives in Preston getting this complete. As I was approaching the end of this, an idea started to come to me. I keep telling you that I am a family history researcher. I keep describing the things that I've found, but how do you actually find them? And come to that, what does a family history researcher actually do? 2023 will actually be my 13th year as a family history researcher, and in that time I have visited at least 13 different libraries and archives and record offices. I've explored all sorts of different resources. Trips to the archives are the main reason that I haven't made a video for all this time. I've been doing a lot of research with parish registers lately. That's not to say that church records are the only thing you can visit in archives to see. Wills, leases, land tax assessments, quarter sessions records, bastardy orders, family papers, trade directories, all of them have their uses. It just depends what you're particularly looking for. Personally, I love a good trade directory, and a well-written will, especially if it's from the pre-census era, can be an absolute goldmine. It can tell you who daughters married, whether there are any grandchildren. It can tell you if you are researching the right ancestor, and that's really important. But over the last probably 25 or so years, online family history research has become very lucrative, especially for the bigger companies. At this point, maybe you are thinking to yourself, but Kate, why are you bothering to drive to Preston, look through old documents when you can just do all that on the internet? Why are people bothering to pay you to do that when it's all on the internet? Because no, actually, not everything is on the internet. Why isn't it on the internet? There are lots of reasons. There might be restrictions applying to particular sets of records. There are laws about when that information can actually be released, like the 1921 census. People fill those forms in on the strict understanding that that information would be kept confidential, it would not be made public for 100 years. So morally, you could argue that the promise that was made to our ancestors, even though they're not still alive to see it in most cases, that promise has to be kept. However much we researchers really want to see that information, a promise was made, so it should be kept. Then consider the practicalities of getting things onto the internet. Scanning things is going to take time and money. Maybe documents have to be unpinned, reconnected, seals maybe have to be separated out and then replaced, and these are really old documents. You've got to be very careful with them. It also takes money. It takes probably several terabytes of space, or whatever is bigger than a terabyte. Think of all that technical wizardry, all that programming that goes into making sure that when you search for John Worsley on the 1851 census, the search engine finds that record that matches John Worsley, and when you click on it, it is linked to the right transcript and also the right image, the right page of the census. If you have used genealogy sites of any description, whether they're subscription based or whether they're free, you will know that most hold a range of resources. And these might include ships' passenger lists, parish registers, sometimes you get your land tax assessments and your wills, maybe you get some criminal records, you might get a selection of trade directories. If you're into trade directories, I must make a special mention here of the University of Leicester's Special Collections website. They have got quite an impressive selection of digitised directories, and I'm going to put a link to that in the description box so you can explore it if you want to. So you can use those trade directories if they interest you, but again you've got to find the ones that were published around the time when your ancestor may have been alive, and they also need to cover the specific area where your ancestor lived if you're going to get full benefit from them. The last couple of years haven't really been too easy for people wanting to visit local archives. In fact, between February 2020 and May 2021, I didn't get anywhere near the Lancashire archives, or any other archives, come to that. Which is not really ideal when one of the selling points of your business is that you can carry out research for people who, for whatever reason, can't visit those archives. But it was just what we had to do when we had to do it. Most archives have dedicated websites, so you can do a little bit of background digging before you even set off. Because most will offer a searchable online catalogue, and these catalogues will list thousands, if not millions, of documents. Some of those, like a will, might just be a single sheet of paper, whereas admission registers from the county asylum might be written up in a hardback book containing 400 or so pages and maybe spanning the admissions for a 2.5-year period. They're not usually indexed by patient's name unless somebody's taken the trouble to do that. Often they will be volunteers who index those. They are quite time consuming and labour intensive to go through, but still very interesting. That's where researchers like me come in. We are the ones who check the probate indexes to find out whether the Thomas Woodcock who was buried on the 21st of October 1835 at Halsall left a will, and if he did, I can then study that will for clues to prove or disprove his connection to a particular family group. I might check the register of discharges and deaths at Lancaster Asylum for John Worsley, who I know died at that asylum in 1903, because that will let me find out when he was admitted, which means that I can then order up the correct book of case notes and discover all sorts of previously unknown details about his mental and physical health. They often kept really detailed notes, even down to temperature charts. Thomas Woodcock and John Worsley actually really existed. They are my direct ancestors. They are not people that I've researched for other people. I have got many examples I could use from paid research, but I don't think it's very professional to cover those in this video. I'm preferring to stick to examples from my own family for demonstration purposes. A day in the archives researching my own family or maybe one of my personal projects like the research I'm doing into the teachers who worked at my old primary school, which is where the inspiration came from for my Letitia Bursko live stream that I did a couple of years ago. That's a rare treat these days. For the past couple of years, since things opened up again, a mixture of one-off commissions and a couple of frankly gigantic projects have been keeping me extremely busy. But I'm not complaining, definitely not complaining, because after all, researching my own family did not pay for my holiday to Bath last year. Before I even begin any research, it's very, very important to do a bit of fact finding. I look at the basic essential information. I try and find out what my inquirer already knows, because there's no point covering the same ground they've already covered. I also try and find out what information is important to them, what are the details they would like to find out. I look at the sources that I might consult. If I'm looking for a will, would they like a summary of that document, or do they want a complete transcription? If I find any interesting documents, would they like photographs? Digital photography is brilliant for this. No printing needed, you send it as an email attachment. Unless there are many of them, in that case Dropbox is your friend here. And the really, really important thing, which archives do I visit to find the relevant records? If I'm looking for something to do with Manchester or Liverpool, will I find those records at the Lancashire Archives in Preston, because both cities were historically part of Old Lancashire, or do I need to go to the central libraries in either city? Different things are kept in different places. Luckily, most of them have these online catalogues with the references often listed in the National Archives catalogue too, with details of where you need to go to find them. Some counties cover such a big area that actually one archive just is not enough. If you're looking at somewhere like Cumbria, the documents could be at Barrow or Carlisle or Kendal or Whitehaven. Luckily, Cumbria Archive Services have designed their online catalogue to include the information about which office you need to go to, so you don't end up with a wasted journeys. I think that's a really good idea. So I use these online catalogues to identify relevant documents and the parish registers and any references that I may need to look up. From that, I work out an estimated price, I look at how long I think it's going to take me to carry the research out, and if that gets approved, then I can start. For family history researchers like me, the pandemic did have one strangely unexpected upside. When the archives were allowed to reopen, some venues restricted visitor numbers, so you had to book a research session and the items that you want to look at in advance. At the Lancashire Archives, this was even down to the individual microfilm reels at one stage, but to be fair, they were actually very flexible when it turned out that I'd ordered the wrong film by mistake. It's very, very easy to get a number out, and they found me the correct one very, very quickly. They were quite happy to do that. But now things have become a lot more flexible. You can request items on the day if you really want to, but they've still kept the online booking system, which I actually really like because it helps me get organised. It means you can pre-book documents and they'll be there when you arrive, and it also helps me to structure my week, because then I can decide that yes, I want to book a session for this day or this afternoon or that morning, and I'll look up some particular documents and that will be another job off my to-do list. It's really helpful. Other facilities, like the archives at Manchester Central Library, already had an online booking system. Theirs was in place definitely by 2016. In Manchester's case, I think it's because not all of their archives are stored on site, so they need 2 days' notice in order to get them across for the researcher to look at. It's all logistics. Then there's getting to the archives. If I drive there, I always check the parking facilities because they are really variable. In 2019, when I went to the West Yorkshire History Centre at Wakefield, I found there was a pay and display car park a very short walk away. Lancashire Archives has got pay and display car park on site. If I'm going to Liverpool, I actually tend to drive to Ormskirk and then get the train into Lime Street. It's the best of both worlds. I don't have a standard method of working. Every commission is going to be a little bit different. The way that I collect the information really depends on what I'm looking for. If I am searching newspaper archives, which you can sometimes find at public libraries, I often prefer to take a small notebook and just transcribe the article by hand. It does mean I've got to type it up later on, but sometimes there isn't really enough space next to the microfilm reader to put a laptop. A notepad and pencil is just as handy. And pencils brings me to another important point. Where in a library you might actually get away with writing notes with a biro, in the archives they won't have that. You need pencils. These are very old documents. Some cases hundreds of years old. You can't replace them. They don't want them damaging. They don't want somebody's fountain pen leaking all over it. They want you to use pencils for good reasons. And one tip I can give you if you are thinking about a trip to the archives is that one pencil is not enough, because you lose them or people borrow them. I do prefer not to use my good drawing pencils for note taking. They're drawing pencils, they have a different purpose. So a few years ago I accidentally came up with a solution to this. I was on my way to Lancashire Archives, checked my bag, haven't got any pencils. So I made an emergency purchase of a packet of 9 pencils, and that was the best thing I ever did. It now lives in the pocket of my laptop case, and it means that wherever I take the laptop, I know I've always got pencils, and I usually take the laptop with me when I go to the archives. One of the really interesting things about family history research is that you come across such a wide variety of records. There are some documents that have to be ordered up from the strong room and viewed in person, things like your wills and leases and tithe maps. It's quite interesting actually to get to grips with old writing, because they're old documents, of course they're going to be full of old writing. Maybe it's because I'm used to it now, but I generally find 18th and 19th century documents fairly easy to read. The main difficulty can just be people's varying levels of literacy, because not everybody went to school, didn't even come into law until the 1870s. And for those who maybe did get some basic education and then went on to do manual work, farm labourers, coal miners, mill workers, even if they had got some education, they may not have had many reasons to write things down in their ordinary working life, so maybe they got out of the habit of writing and didn't feel as confident. Maybe that's why a lot of them signed their marriage register with an X, because that was what they were comfortable with. If you go back a bit further, in the 17th century you're probably looking at things that were written with a quill. Before that, One of the changes made by Henry VIII's minister Thomas Cromwell around about the time of the Reformation was that from the 1540s, churches were required to keep registers of all burials, marriages and baptisms. That is why many of the parish registers that exist now, particularly the Church of England ones, tend to date from around the 1540s. Even though there was this move away from the influences of the Catholic Church at this point, people were accustomed to writing in Latin, so these records are sometimes written up in Latin, or they might be Latinised English, so you get filius instead of son of, filia instead of daughter of. Dates can be recorded in Roman numerals. Really fun if it was written with a quill. They go a bit curtly, they're quite hard to read. So when you combine all these different factors, suddenly you find yourself, as a family history researcher, learning skills that you never knew you were ever going to need. If you do encounter any Latin on your archival travels, have a look online for websites that let you translate words from one language to another. You can put in your Latin word and it will hopefully give you an English equivalent. They are especially good if you're trying to decode Catholic parish registers, because certainly into the 19th century the Catholic Church often did keep its records in Latin, even the pre-printed registers. Other collections, like the records published by the Lancashire Parish Register Society and the Catholic Record Society, are published as books. Where there are books, there are usually indexes with surnames. That's a much quicker way to check through the registers. It's not difficult to read or search a professionally printed book. You haven't got the old handwriting to contend with. Sometimes records are available on microfiche. If you went to school in the 1990s and 2000s, like I did, you'd find similarities with those overhead projector transparencies that we had to copy notes from. It's a sheet of film. It's about A6 in size, so 148 by 105 millimetres, or 4.1 by 5.8 inches if you're into imperial, and it contains maybe 40 or 50 miniature images of the original pages from the church records or whatever other publication you're looking at. And I mainly use them for searching parish registers, but sometimes you'll also find gravestone inscription projects done by community groups, maybe history or heritage societies that have been deposited at the archives. Microfiche is a dream to work with. You trap it between two glass plates, switch on the light underneath, focus the reader, which acts like a magnifier, and you just move the glass sideways and backwards and forwards to go from one page to the next. It feels a bit like a typewriter without doing the typing. It is wonderful to work with. And then there's the other format. A little like microfiche, but not quite. We need to talk about microfilm. My nemesis. Get a good microfilm reader. Searching them is easy. Unless you're me, you could get 5 minutes entertainment out of watching me try to get the film onto the take-up reel. The first section of the film is usually dark, and like microfiche, the copied pages of the parish register entries, quarter sessions records, newspapers or whatever else you're searching are so tiny that you can't read them just by holding the film up to the light. You've got to load it onto the machine, you've got to wind it on. You've probably got to wind about 2 feet of film on to get to the place where you actually want it to be, and then you realise the film is back to front. So you wind it back again, turn it over, you put it back on, you start again, and you hope that it's the right way round. And there is no other solution to this unless your particular superpower is reading 200-year-old handwriting that looks like it's being reflected in a mirror. It's the only way to do it. I will assume now that I have got my microfilm the right way up. And you scroll through the film using either a manual handle or buttons set at varying speeds. Perfect for those times when you've got one roll of film covering 100 years worth of records and the period that you want to look at is somewhere bang in the middle. Or it might also be a film containing lots of very short parish records that are all connected somehow. I've recently been looking at non-conformist records in Lancashire. These registers tend to be quite short, so what they did was to put multiple sets of records onto the same film, and they filmed them with the parish name in alphabetical order. So the registers for several church in Bury were further along the same film as something else that was based in Brinscall. Blackburn would be before that, perhaps. So you learn the alphabetical systems. The helpful thing is that the images on the page that you're looking at will be in exactly the same order as the original set of church records, because they've scanned page by page by page. Whether it's church records or newspapers or quarter sessions. Quarter sessions, by the way, are the ones to look at if you are interested in filiation and maintenance orders. That is to say, when an unmarried mother brought a claim for what we now call child support, child maintenance payments against the father of her baby. That can help to fill in some interesting gaps in your family, because that will identify the father of an illegitimate baby. Really helpful if there's a gap on the birth certificate. I am getting better with microfilm, but honestly my heart prefers microfiche. You may be picking up at this point that family history research can get really quite addictive. And in fact, even when I'm doing work for somebody else, looking up records for long gone people who I'm not even related to, I find it's very easy to get attached to the stories of these people. And I can get quite disappointed when I can't find any trace of the person that I've been asked to look for. I go back and check again just to make sure that you're definitely not in the records, whoever you are that I'm looking for. And once I've finished the research, I always like to send my customers a report about my research session. I will include a list of documents that I've checked, newspapers, microfilms, books, whatever other material I needed to consult, even if the best I can say is that I checked this set of parish registers from this date to this date and there were no burials at all at that church between May 1826 and July 1828. So that way I know and they know that one possible resource can be crossed off the list and it doesn't need to be looked at again. Sometimes I print the work and post it to people. More often than not it gets sent as an email attachment. Sometimes I do projects that involve quite a lot of digital photos. That is when you really need something like Dropbox or another file sharing system. Because after all, I mean, who really wants to find their inbox has been cluttered up with 50 megabytes worth of attachments? My email account would have something to say if that happened to me, so I try and use the delivery method that seems least complicated. This channel is coming up to being 3 years old. I began it in April 2020 chiefly because we were all sitting around at home. Nobody could go to the archives, they were all shut. I had been researching for other people for around about 9 years. Some of the challenges that I have just described in this video might make it sound as though being a family history researcher is really hard work and every single commission is a bit of a chore. That is not the case at all. Every single commission that I get is always different, and that is why I love it. If I did not love this job, I would not do it. I thought it would be nice to finish by talking about some of the exciting bits. Well, I think they're exciting. My job, when you boil it down to one sentence, is about learning more about people because their descendants think they are worth researching. And sometimes it is the smallest detail that make the biggest impression. Like my 7 times great-granddad, Joseph Hurst. He was the one who left a set of bedding to each of his daughters, and he left his best red waistcoat to his 26-year-old grandson. I like to imagine Joseph getting ready for church on a Sunday. He's standing there in his house in Ormskirk in front of his mirror, and he's putting on his best red waistcoat, and he's probably wearing a wig because he was 70 odd at that time and it was 1818, so I think he wore a wig. Or there's my 4 times great-granddad, Thomas Woodcock, who was 62 when he married a 17-year-old Catholic girl. He outlived her by 2 years, believe it or not, and almost immediately after her death he wrote a will instructing that their youngest children, who were then aged 5, 7 and 10, should be brought up as members of the Church of England and that they would be disinherited if they chose any other option. That probably tells you something about him, doesn't it? It's seeing a wax seal on a document that your ancestor signed and realising you can make out a little deer or a stag in the wax impression. It's finding a set of late 18th century land tax assessments written up in notebooks featuring these pretty covers with marble patterns or prints that look like they could have been used for textiles and sold in the local drapers. I don't know who bought those notebooks in Lancaster back in the 1780s when they were compiling the land taxes. I don't know where they came from, but they made a few hours that little bit more colourful back in December 2021. Occasionally, the record office, the archives, the library will put an exhibition on. In September 2019, one of my voluntary roles took me to Manchester Central Library just as they were hosting an exhibition about the bicentenary of the massacre at St Peter's Square, which is better known to history as Peterloo. And you may know that Manchester Central Library is in fact on St Peter's Square, which adds a whole new dimension to that exhibition. Part of it featured banners made and very probably carried by women's groups like the Manchester Female Reform Society and the Female Society of Bolton. And somebody had also organised a series of photographs. All had been inspired by the events of Peterloo. And personally, I thought there was something almost a bit haunting about them. There's just something that made you stop and think. Not forgetting, if you should happen to call into an archive round about December, there's a very good chance that you're going to see one of these somewhere. I always think it makes the place look so festive. It would be utterly untruthful of me to pretend that every single job that I take on is easy or quick or simple to answer, or that I can find exactly what people are hoping for every single time I start some research. It doesn't happen like that. Sometimes our ancestors did lie about their birthplaces. Sometimes they didn't know, sometimes they got confused. Sometimes matching records don't turn up for those reasons. Sometimes you find that somebody just didn't bother to keep any records at all of baptisms or burials for an 18-month period just at the time when you need the information to be there. But the past decade has shown me that there are so many different resources out there. There are so many different ways that you can find out more about a person's life, about your ancestors' life. Or maybe it's the history of a school or a community, or whatever else it is that you want to know about. So whether it's an affiliation order or an entry on a land tax assessment, it might be a note in a parish register, a little line in a trade directory, or some detail on a property lease. There are so many ways that you can add details to the story of whoever or whatever you're researching. And exploring those records is my job, and I love it. I absolutely love it.